Intuitive design. What will you learn in intuitive design? In this section, you will learn to create balanced compositions by using squares, circles, triangles, arcs, amorphous forms, trees, parallel lines, linearities, radial symmetries and grids. Please make the drawings on the screen in the time allotted for each slide and move on to draw the next image after you have completed your drawing. Pause the video if necessary and complete the drawing step by step. At the end of each episode, you'll see a short video that will help you quickly draw what you're watching in time-lapse format. Here we go. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, squares. Start with a simple square. Then divide this square into 4 with dashed lines. Find new squares inside the newly formed pieces. You can apply the 4 and 4 rule or try different partitions. Keep finding smaller squares. And keep copying the shapes to create an asymmetrical balance. Paint or scribble the rectangles formed between the lines. Consider that these rectangles may represent important directions of pedestrian access or areas where sunshades will be placed. Enlarge the rectangles near the center of gravity of the composition to emphasize centrality with an asymmetrical balance. Elliptical axis can be a supportive item for balancing linear axis. Instead of getting stuck in the prime shape, consider the possibilities. Can any elliptical axis in the image represent controlled pedestrian access, service entrances, or public flow from the city to the area? Finalize the main parts and create a tubular system or strong path pattern to complete the gaps. You can complete the outline by sketching the landscape possibilities that can be positioned around your design. First work done. Bravo! Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, perspectives. Making a preliminary design from perspective helps us to see possibilities that we did not think of during plan and section drawings. The purpose of the perspective should be to represent the life presented by the design as it is. It is not to show the structure better than it is by giving very dramatic angles. That's why it's always a good idea to start the perspective by emphasizing the access lines and circulation areas. Connections redefine their public meaning with elements of the surrounding landscape. New vertical lines also mean new parts. These parts can be developed to emphasize the facade, the deck arrangement on the walkway, the pergola or the green axis. Sometimes, the traces defined by these parts may be the precursors of a building fragmentation that we did not think of on the plan step. A structural division should be highlighted and help the associated parts integrate into the design. New eaves, roads and elevations can support this fragmentation. Of course, thinking about these brings mind the idea of existing elevations can be connected together. This also means connecting the circulations of the users of the space. The idea of a new level connection means new retail spaces at ground level, arcades, crossings, and, above all, a rich pedestrian experience. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, triangles. Triangles are the shapes that help us think about intersections before parallels. Of course, though, here, in order to get a large number of intersecting lines, we'll first need the parallels of the sides of the triangle. Parallels intersect and directions change. Well, these changes of direction can give us ideas for creating new pieces or passages. Parts expanding in different directions need a junction point to hold these parts. This can be a modern square or a dynamic terrace. Incorporating green and water elements into the system clarifies our ideas of how the center will work. Highlighting some of the edges of the triangles and the details of the pond and green will make it easier for you to clarify the composition. Of course, drawing parallels is not the only option. A new green axis can also develop in a direction perpendicular to the existing design line. Such interventions enrich the tissue. And to remember the parallels once. The parallels we used earlier serve not only to create paths, but also to break triangles. Connecting the shattered triangles with lower or smaller pieces allows buildings to be approximated to human scale. It is very important to consider buildings with their surroundings. Let's finish this study by remembering that the three structures will not work without public flow. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, circles. Different sized circles mean different foci. Different centers of gravity, different slices or different starting points. However, in order to use these differences, you must add elliptical lines to the circles. Create paths by gradually increasing the distance between the lines. Dividing the paths can also give some ideas for green field modulation. Continue dividing the composition into parts. Have you thought that a new axis derived from modulation could be the first sketch of a pier, eave or a secondary access road? Feel free to sharpen some of the blurry lines in the drawing. Start thinking of binaries like building landscape or pedestrian vehicle. And ask that important question, how do pedestrians and vehicles enter and exit the area? Resketch your links based on your response. You can make new additions to the extent that the asymmetrical balance created by the composition allows. Use coloring for highlighting undefined areas, not for embellishment. Tones of 3 colors are enough. Do not exceed 5 colors. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, parallel lines. Cross lines mean strong centers. So, how can the 4 lines connecting to the center be diversified with a unique approach? Strategies for breaking the whole into parts will work here as well. But if some technical area in your program requires rectangles, don't insist on a parallelogram composition. Walls with an angle of 80 to 85 degrees instead of 90 can cause loss of space, as in this example, but this dramatic effect can be used in galleries, exhibition areas, etc. Once the main parts are clear, the secondary parts will also be designable. Take care to preserve this hierarchy. A distinctive, relatively large spine and smaller drawers that attach to that spine. This great idea almost always works. But don't forget to design a shared space to anchor these pieces together with a sketch of an orthogonal caterpillar hovering between the masses. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, linearity. The pieces can be related in many unexpected ways once they get stuck in a common axis. Linear array is always an advantage that makes your exercise easier. Capturing elliptical traces between the parts that make up the linear array enables controlled magnification of squares and rectangles. Combining parts joined by elliptical traces on both axes can offer flexible solutions for new formations. Horizontal connectors can also offer spatial possibilities. Note how many new vistas are formed in such a composition. This cross area can be designed as a walkway that can be surrounded by landscape elements. A powerful center for the masses. In this way, you can get new ideas about how green areas can surround the masses. Each grid can be a new layer of green space. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, radial symmetry 1. Even if only one line is drawn from the square surrounding a center to the opposite square, a large number of pie slices are formed. Slices mean new slices. Thanks to radial symmetry, slices are derived from slices. All circle segments represent new connection potentials with the environment. As new connections are emphasized, the number of centers multiplies, the empty spaces become more diverse, and the building complex begins to take on a new form. Reducing the initial emphasis in the surrounding squares prepares the composition for new combinations. Walkways, patios, or balconies that help you create a rhythm. All elements can come together to form a unique complex. Do not be content with using green areas as a visual balance element. Active or passive, green spaces must have a direct/indirect function. And remember that all attachments must first serve radial symmetry. This is exactly why some squares that you originally designed as buildings can even turn into pools. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, radial symmetry too. Even when a single line is drawn from the square surrounding a center to the opposite side, many areas are defined. These lines can also define new building forms. Draw parallel lines using borders. You can multiply the number of buildings connected to the common center. If you have expanded the buildings towards the center, you can also combine them to create a new form such as L, U, C. Defining the public space outside of these forms by highlighting the new forms makes it easier to imagine the third dimension. Now draw parallel lines from the newly created forms, just as you drew lines extending to the center earlier. In this way, you determine the characteristics of the green spaces and walking paths in the close circle. Combine the three masses with another approach derived from these forms. The combiner can be a path, pergola, or a tube. If the lines of these points are extended, the secondary connections reaching the center can turn into more useful areas. This makes plan more pluralistic. Thus, piers, exhibition areas, commercial units can also be connected to these axes. In any case, an easily accessible route to the center is created. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, arcs. Think of these lines as caterpillars. Two caterpillars mean countless possibilities. If elliptical lines can be thought with linear axes, most sketches can turn into balanced designs. Taking this into account, adding boundary axes to the endpoints might be a good start. It also represents the primary limitations of your sketch. Borders are good for creativity. Next, check the parallelism of the axes, their centers, and evaluate the elliptical motion together. Complete the requirements of radial symmetry in this way. In addition to highlighting buildings, it is also important to show how to evaluate start and end points. Which building traces will turn into eaves? Which ones will be integrated with water? Could the orange-colored intersections be common spaces? The composition can be enlarged if the centers are preserved. In this way, even the logic in an art museum can be applied to a campus. Now, watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, grids 1. Although a composition of 9 squares may seem static at the beginning, it offers effective options in terms of asymmetrical balance. In this case, immediately start forming groups of 2, 3, or 4. In this way, you will find new ideas for possible combinations. Creating new dimensions by multiplying the lengths of the squares by 0.5, 1.5 or 2 allows you to expand your design in a balanced way, adhering to the modulation logic. What is your strongest idea that defines your design? Well, with this idea, can you reevaluate the public access? Just like the green elements, the water element is positioned within the square modulation and at a distance that can be easily experienced by the users of main axis. It's always a good idea to try as much composition as possible within a grid solution. Finally, you will find the most suitable design for the pedestrian experience. Now it's time to add the green spots. Now we know that black lines represent buildings. Turquoise ones emphasize skylights and browns connect pedestrian flow. This controlled variety and gradation in the layout makes it easy to grab the attention of the jury at first glance. Pluralism in irrational formation. This is everything. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, grids too. Let's try to combine 9 squares with elliptical lines, this time. The exercise will show you how to transform a typical grid composition into more organic forms. All you have to do is to create caterpillars with squares at the beginning and end. The caterpillars should intersect each other if possible, creating new form possibilities. These caterpillars should then elongate and expand. This elongation and expansion can identify not the mass itself, but the ground traces that reinforce its effect. Or it can help to create a larger caterpillar that directly joins the two lines. Test the possibilities by colorizing the lines and compare the compositions. Did you notice that the entire movement of the caterpillars takes place within the boundaries of the 9 squares? This linear control is the key to a successful site plan. That's why it's a better idea to balance the elliptical axis in the center with straight lines. Of course, if the caterpillars can also be divided in the third dimension, it can be easier to create a more aesthetic composition. Or you can balance all this with an unexpected artificial pond, an urban park, or a special bike track. When extending the design, you don't need to explore new angles anymore. Stick to the grids and former ellipses. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, amorphous forms. Let's get to the beans. Beans are great for thinking about asymmetrical balance, as they have multiple centers of gravity, slightly different from caterpillars. Have each center create new elliptical traces. Let the traces expand and multiply. This tactic can also be used to adapt to the topography. Associating the centers can make it easier to find groups to split. This fragmentation can be determined by the characteristics of the landscape elements. Elliptical traces are necessary to design both the relationship of the mass with the landscape and the relationship of the eaves and walkways with each other. A connecting element to balance relationships increases the asymmetrical power of the composition. That means countless intersections and possibilities. So, highlight the strongest of the possibilities and plan an uninterrupted flow by designing the secondary connection paths. Relate piers and paths to show that you are planning a flow between buildings and environmental elements. Complete the composition by highlighting the necessary points. Now the parts are ready for 3D modeling. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms, trees. There are many ways to take advantage of the presence of trees in the landscape. The most valid of these is to create new sketches from existing traces of trees. Imagine that there could be a pedestrian circulation among the trees, but instead of immediately plotting the path, first draw the possibilities. Highlight the most appropriate traces and create a path. A unique composition will turn out. Highlight what else is around, what reinforcements you will support the pedestrian walkway. Outdoor furnishings can be used to emphasize some of the elliptical lines. This will enrich the plan by demonstrating pedestrian choices. They can also give an idea about the forms of temporary or permanent structures to be designed in the area. At that point, choose asymmetry over symmetry. Divide your sketches of the form and follow the principles you've already learned so that the smaller parts produce smaller parts as well. Now watch the sketching video and practice. Intuitive design by drawing and combining forms. End of section. In this episode, you laid the foundations for the most important issue that attracts the attention of the jury in architectural competitions: visual balance. Most people can use computer programs and presentation tricks well, but designing with visual balance is something only a few architects can achieve. Repeat these exercises until your hand gets used to it. Instead of repeatedly drawing a line when sketching, use parallels and intersecting arcs to create unique, balanced combinations. As the weeks go by, you'll be amazed how these simple exercises improve your design skills tremendously.